The strange center of the Gazala battle was not a ridge, a town, or a grand fortress. It was a pocket in the desert where Rommel's attacking force, after sweeping around the southern flank, found itself in a position that was both dangerous and powerful. British minefields lay between much of the Axis force and its easier supply routes to the west. British boxes and mobile formations stood around it. Bir Hakeim still held out to the south, interfering with the southern door through which Rommel had hoped to move freely. On a map, the situation could look like a trap, yet this trapped attacker would soon make the pocket known as the Cauldron into the battle's center of gravity.
If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore.
The name fits because the fighting seemed to boil around a confined space that should not have favored the army inside it. Rommel's mobile force had moved behind the Gazala Line, but bold movement had carried it into a logistical crisis. Tanks needed fuel, guns needed ammunition, men needed water, and damaged vehicles needed recovery and repair. The minefields that had not stopped the original sweep now stood like a barrier between the Axis spearhead and the supplies needed to keep that spearhead alive. Rommel had dislocated the British defense, but he had not escaped the arithmetic of the desert. A force behind the enemy line could frighten its opponent, but it could also starve if routes were not opened. For the British, this should have been the moment of greatest opportunity. Rommel had advanced into a pocket, his supply routes were strained, and his forces were operating in an exposed position east of the main mine belts. The Eighth Army still possessed armored strength, artillery, defended boxes, and the ability to strike from more than one direction. If the British could concentrate quickly and attack with coordination, they might crush the Axis force before it organized itself. That was the promise of the moment, and it explains why some British commanders believed Rommel had finally gone too far. The problem was that recognizing an opportunity is not the same as exploiting it. Rommel's response was to turn danger into structure. Instead of panicking because his army was in a pocket, he made the pocket defensible. Axis units began organizing a perimeter, bringing anti-tank guns into position, using armor as a mobile shield, and fighting to open supply routes through the minefields. German and Italian forces worked to create a defensive zone that could absorb British attacks, while engineers and supply troops tried to solve the problem of survival. This was the paradox of the Cauldron. The attacker had become partially trapped, but by accepting the pocket and organizing it, Rommel made the British come to him under conditions he could shape. The key to that transformation was the Axis anti-tank system. British tank attacks had already suffered badly in the desert when they advanced into well-sighted guns, and the Cauldron gave Rommel a chance to repeat that pattern. Panzers could maneuver, threaten, and draw British armor forward, but the killing power often came from anti-tank guns placed to cover likely approaches. The famous 88mm guns mattered, but they were part of a larger defensive method that included smaller anti-tank weapons, artillery, mines, and disciplined fire control. British tanks entering this environment did not simply meet enemy tanks. They entered a prepared battlefield designed to break up their attack before it became decisive. This made British coordination absolutely essential, and coordination was precisely what the battle kept denying them. To reduce the Cauldron, the Eighth Army needed armor, infantry, artillery, engineers, and air support to act in sequence and with a shared picture of the enemy. Tanks alone could not simply charge into the pocket and expect victory. Infantry had to help clear and hold ground. Artillery had to suppress enemy guns. Engineers had to deal with mines and obstacles. and commanders had to time each effort so the Axis defenses were overwhelmed rather than merely disturbed. When attacks went forward in pieces, they gave Rommel exactly what he needed: separate blows that could be absorbed and punished. The British also had to fight against misleading appearances. The Axis force in the Cauldron looked vulnerable, and in some ways it truly was. Supply remained precarious, fuel shortages were serious, and Rommel's position would have become untenable if the British had sealed him off and applied steady pressure with enough force. But vulnerability does not mean helplessness. An army short of supplies can still be deadly if it has its guns positioned well and its opponent attacks badly. This is one of the most important lessons of Gazala. A trapped enemy may still control the immediate tactical terms of the fight if he can make the attacker come forward into prepared fire. Inside the pocket, the Axis were not merely waiting. Engineers worked on routes through the minefields, because every opened corridor changed the meaning of the battle. A lane through the mines was more than a path on the ground. It was a lifeline. Through it could pass fuel, ammunition, water, medical evacuation, replacement vehicles, and the orders and reports that kept a modern force functioning. British pressure against the Cauldron was therefore also a race against Axis engineering and supply work. If Rommel remained cut off, his danger would increase. If he opened a reliable corridor, the pocket would become less a trap and more a fortified springboard. The British boxes around the wider Gazala position complicated the picture further. They still held ground and still represented real defensive strength, but the battle's focus had shifted. A box could remain intact while Rommel built power in the Cauldron. A garrison could fight bravely while the mobile battle outside its perimeter moved in a direction that weakened the whole system. The British defensive concept had depended on fixed positions and roaming armor supporting each other. In the Cauldron phase, that relationship began to strain badly. The boxes could delay and obstruct, but the armored forces had to deliver a decision. Without that decision, the boxes became islands in a sea of maneuver. Rommel's command style helped him survive this dangerous stage. He was not merely following a rigid plan drawn before the battle began. He adapted to the situation and treated the pocket as the new center of operations. That did not mean every decision was perfect, and it did not remove the real danger facing his army. But he understood that initiative is not only movement. Initiative also means forcing the enemy to react to the battle you have created. By holding the Cauldron, opening supply routes, and punishing British attacks, Rommel made the Eighth Army spend its strength trying to solve his problem instead of imposing a problem of its own. For British tank crews, the fighting around the Cauldron could be brutally frustrating. They were not facing an enemy who simply stood in the open and accepted a tank duel. They were entering a layered battlefield where dust, smoke, gun flashes, burning vehicles, and uncertain reports made it hard to understand what was happening. A crew might see enemy armor ahead, while the more dangerous anti-tank gun waited off to the side. A formation might press forward, take losses, fall back, and leave behind damaged vehicles that were difficult to recover under fire. The drain on armored strength was cumulative. The Eighth Army was not being destroyed in one clean stroke, but it was being worn down in the very fight meant to finish Rommel. The Cauldron also revealed how local tactical success and operational success can diverge. The British could damage Axis units, destroy vehicles, and make Rommel's situation uncomfortable, yet still fail to collapse the pocket. The Axis could survive attacks and reopen supply, yet remain exposed and dependent on continued improvisation. Each side had moments that looked promising. Each side also carried weaknesses that could have undone it. This is why the Cauldron phase is so important to understanding Gazala. It was not a simple story of one army chasing another. It was a contest over whether an exposed armored force would be crushed before it transformed exposure into advantage. In the end, the Cauldron became the place where the battle's momentum began to shift in a way the British did not fully grasp soon enough. Rommel had entered a dangerous pocket, but he used anti-tank defenses, engineering, supply corridors, and aggressive command to make that pocket work for him. The Eighth Army had a chance to destroy him, but repeated attacks failed to deliver the coordinated blow required. For the history of armored warfare, the lesson is severe and enduring. A breakthrough or flank march is only the beginning of a battle, and a trap is only a trap if the enemy cannot turn it into a fortress. At Gazala, Rommel's army seemed caught in the Cauldron, but the fire that burned there began consuming British strength instead.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.